The threats didn't come with loud voices. Nobody banged on his door or made phone calls in the middle of the night. What happened was quieter than that. His name disappeared from the promotion shortlist without explanation. When he asked, his supervisor shrugged and said, "These things come from above, nothing personal, you understand?" He understood. Then the transfer letter arrived. A desk in a satellite office where nothing important ever crossed his path, where the ceiling leaked and the staff spent most of the day waiting for 4 p.m. His new colleagues were pleasant enough, but they all knew why he was there, and nobody asked, because nobody wanted to be associated with the answer. His wife felt the shift before he admitted it was happening. The invitations to dinners and functions stopped. Friends from church who used to call on Sunday afternoons suddenly had reasons they couldn't talk long. One of her cousins called to say he was being foolish, that 50 million was not bribe money, it was opportunity, and what exactly was he trying to prove? She didn't have an answer her cousin would accept, and that silence sat between her and her husband for weeks. This is the thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing in a compromised system. You become a mirror, and people hate mirrors. Every colleague who took their own envelope, every friend who signed off on substandard materials, every relative who climbed the ladder by looking the other way, they all had to see themselves reflected in his refusal. Most people don't forgive you for that. They need you to be corrupt so they can stop feeling like cowards. His children didn't understand. His daughter asked why they couldn't go on the same holidays as her classmates, why the car still made that grinding noise, why daddy seemed tired all the time now. He couldn't explain to a 12-year-old that her father was a good man in a country that punishes good men. He said they were making choices, that some things cost more than money. She nodded the way children do when adults are saying things that don't add up. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not the money he didn't have, not the career that stalled, but the feeling of standing still while everyone he knew moved on. He would see former colleagues at weddings, and they would hug him warmly, ask how he was doing, then find excuses to drift toward other conversations. He was a walking accusation, and nobody wanted to stand next to him long enough to be reminded. The project went forward without his signature. Someone else provided it. Someone with softer hands and a clearer understanding of how things actually work in this country. He watched from his dead-end desk as the contracts were finalized, as the trucks started rolling, as the concrete got poured in places where the reinforcement wasn't quite what the specifications demanded. He had done the math. He knew which sections would fail first. Here is the part that doesn't make headlines. Not all of it collapsed. The sections where his team had already done the work, where the materials had been verified and the compaction tests had been signed honestly, those held. The rains came heavy that first year, the kind of downpour that turns roads into rivers, and some stretches of the project washed out just as he predicted they would. But not the ones he touched. Those stayed. A younger engineer from his old department called him one night, voice low, 5 years into the new job. He said he remembered something, a small decision, a corner nobody was checking, a substitution that would have been easy to approve and impossible to detect. He said he didn't approve it, and he didn't know why, but he thought of the man who walked away from 50 million and couldn't sleep on the other answer. That was it. No ceremony, no award, just a 23-year-old who made a different choice in the dark. This story didn't travel through newspapers or television or social media. It traveled the way real things travel, through phone calls between professionals who are tired of hating themselves, through late-night conversations in living rooms where someone admits they don't recognize who they've become, through the quiet of a conscience that finally finds a reference point. One man's refusal doesn't fix a nation, but it creates an inconvenient memory for everyone who said it couldn't be done. His children grew up. It took time, years that stretched longer than they should have, but they eventually understood what kind of man raised them. His daughter, now in university, told a friend her father was the only person she knew who actually believed what he said he believed. She said it without pride, matter of fact, the way you describe someone's height or the color of their eyes. It was just true. This is not a story with a reward at the end. He didn't get a promotion eventually, didn't receive a national honor, didn't become the subject of a viral campaign. The reward is smaller and bigger than all of that. He can still look at himself. He doesn't flinch when corruption comes up in conversation. He doesn't have to rehearse explanations for things he signed. If you were in that room, with that envelope, with those calm, reasonable people, telling you this is simply how the system works, what would you have done? Not what you think you would do. Not what you post online when nobody is testing you. What you would actually do when the air conditioning hummed and the generator clicked on and the money sat there, real and warm and enough to change everything. The system survives because enough people believe they are the only ones who can't afford to say no. That belief is the real foundation of corruption. Not greed, not politics, just the quiet conviction that integrity is a luxury for people with nothing to lose. One man proved otherwise. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind you Nigeria still has people worth believing in. And share this with someone who needs to know that integrity is not extinct.